Thursday is that I have about twice as much, all right, I have about twice as much content as we have time for. And so we had intended on talking about, first of all, I want you to understand what discipline is. And in order to do that and do it well, we're going to spend a lot of time on developmental stages and on the brain body, kind of trying to match those up for discipline that fits the stages they're in. At some point in time, Angela has said we'll probably have the opportunity to come back around and look at what are we doing when we create a family culture. But no, you will not be cheated out of that. It just isn't likely to happen tonight. So what is discipline? What is it? The root word of discipline is disciple. And for anyone with a Christian context, you have an image in your head of what a disciple is. He was someone who was being taught by a master teacher, Jesus. So the root word is based on teach. Discipline is to teach, not to punish. And that is a very difficult thing for families who have experienced a lot of harshness to begin to separate out that when I am disciplining a child, my goal and my efforts are to teach this child how to do better, how to build this framework. Its goal is to establish a framework so that this child, as they grow, will become more able to self-manage and to self-discipline. And so, what we do should fit then how they're able to think about it. Do they understand rules? So it needs to fit their bodies and their brains. So who are they? Well, there are components of understanding who they are. The first is temperament. And temperament is something that we are born with. When there are 9 components of it, it's approach, and with, slow approach, high approach. The usual label of that is introvert, extrovert. We're born with an activity level. And I loved hearing Latrice say she has some pretty high energy people in her life. And that is hardwired into us. Some people are more adaptable. They'll flow with disruptions than others. Some are highly sensitive. Some are more easily distractible. These are all components of who we are biologically. Then we start looking at stages of development. And when we talk about developing, there are all kinds of theories that people use to do it. Now, certainly we know about physical development. We start looking at milestones, or when kids roll over, or when they're going to walk, when they should talk. But there's also some milestones or some differences in the way I'm able to problem solve. So there was a guy named Piaget who looked at how is it that we problem solve when we're little versus when we're a little bit bigger or when we're older. And so when you look at a small child who's handed a 4-piece puzzle, their first problem solving skill is, can I push it harder? And then as they get a little older, they begin to say, well, if I turn it, maybe it'll fit in there. So there are times when you will look at toddlers and say, I can watch them think, because they are changing the way they're growing into what skills do they have to problem solve with us. So what I've brought you here is based on a guy named Erik Erikson, who talked about psychosocial development. Another one, Kohlberg, who talked about how our morals develop over time. Sigelman, who looked at how friendship changes as we grow. So this is all, and Piaget, who looked at how we problem solved. And these are all kind of meshed together here when I describe them. So the first stage is building trust, and it starts at 0 to 6 months. So all of those times, for those of you who've had access to these tiny people from the very beginning, getting up at 2 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning, and again at 5. And it's like, not that I'm always happy to see this baby multiple times in the night, but the fact that I get up and faithfully attend to their needs allows them to trust the world and to trust you. And out of that trust comes attachment. And attachment underneath are the seeds for our mental health. They're also a deep, deep seed for discipline. Because once I am attached to someone, I am more likely to want to engage in experiences where I will please them. So discipline comes first of all from that soft side of care, that love component. 6 to 18 months, their driven personhood is to be doing. So you think about your 6-monther, you can still put them down on the floor, turn away, and they'll still be about where you put them. But an 18-monther, if you put them down on the floor and you turn your back, goodness only knows what they would have tasted, climbed on, pulled down, etc. Because the internal drive is to do. And out of that, we think what happens. Well, let me do a quick example here. This is the stage in which little ones learn to walk. And they go through that step of, 2-step plunk. And in that process of pulling up and doing that, how many of you have ever experienced an adult who did that little, anybody have that sense of, what does that do to you as a listener to have that sound come at you? Think about that. It'll raise your blood pressure. It invites fear. It makes you hesitate to start. And what this is where we think about, what baggage do we carry as human beings? Do we trust that we can be out moving in our world if we're invited to be scared? And this is why we think that maybe someone who is at the level of Angela, okay, here's this new opportunity. Does her gut clench at it? Or does she say, gee, I wonder what this will be, and go off and tries it? So adults carry some of this early parenting they experience the rest of our lives. It's not as though we're broken that our parents kind of scared us, but it does mean when we're an adult, we might have to rethink some of this and have to think about or take charge of it as an adult when we have some of this, quote, baggage from our childhood. 18 months to 3, what's in the middle of that? Think about the magic number that's in the middle of that and how we talk about that magic number. So in the middle of that is 2. And the way we talk about 2-year-olds, they are terrible. They are so hard. The reality is that this is the stage where they begin to think for themselves. So they're not as easy as your little toddler was that you could scooch along, because your person is starting to know what they want. And it's the seeds of boundary that are being planted. So we need to acknowledge the fact that for some of us, when I'm in charge as an adult, I'm perfectly happy. And now I've got to deal with somebody who doesn't want to just flow with me. It's tempting to want to fight that rather than guide it. And I'll get into these more deeply, I promise, but this is just the overview phase. 3 to 6-year-olds. This is a stage where you will begin to hear power language. So yeah, they might call you a dumbo dodo head. However, if there is profanity in your family, they may actually try to give that back to you as a way to have power. They may try as a way to have power. What did that one do to you folks? So I love to see some of those nods, because the reality is whining is incredibly powerful, because underneath it are the pitches and tones of a sick baby. And you are biologically hardwired to fix that. If you had a 7-monther who had that kind of sounds, you would be watching to see how sick are they? What do they really need? Can I fix it and make it better? Meanwhile, if you have a 6-year-old who's whining, it's still, well, you want to fix it and make it go away. But the reality is that this is a tool to figure out, how do I get help? Can I manage? Can I pull in the troops? What works for me to have power? And this is a stage when my brain has taken a brain growth spurt, and I can frighten myself with my imagination. And so it's the age of monsters. It's the age in which I can be really scared about a whole number of things that never frightened me before. So I'm going to drop this down so I can see a little. So the monsters and the princesses, because we don't think much about the fact that, you don't always have to be scary to have power, right? If I'm the most beautiful, I have power. If I'm a rescue ranger, I can have power. So all of their play is involved with, how do I have power? And then we get into what we call the structure and self-defining stage of the 6 to 12-year-old. This is, Freud did us a deep disservice when he called it the Age of Tranquility. So any of you who are living with 6 to 12-year-olds, I doubt your house is tranquil. And you think about, what does it mean to be 6 when I am egocentric and very clear that I am excited by school or my new red shoes or whatever? And then to be 12, and I don't know what shoes I want till I talk to 4 other friends or see what else they've got. So I go from being egocentric to being sociocentric. But Freud lumped it all together, and we are grateful for teachers who talk about early elementary and late elementary. We also, before we had developmental theory, had the Catholic Church. And the thing about the Catholic Church is that when you think about First Communion, you find out that, gee, why would they pick the age of First Communion to be in that 7-8-year-old magic number? Well, what they noticed is that it's an age of reason, in the sense that now I can go to confession. I can remember what I did last week and judge it right or wrong, and then hold myself accountable for it and do atonement or do whatever I need to do, make it better. That's a whole different way to think than somebody who's 3, who can't remember yesterday what they did, let alone judge it right or wrong and how to make it better. So all of this developmental stuff has to do with, who am I raising? How do I help move them along in this process? And why it's so important to have some sense of development underneath it. Certainly our 12 to 18-year-olds are claiming more identity. They will layer on that their own expressions of sexuality. They will take whatever values you have been raising them with and plant them right in front of your nose. So if out of your messages you said, don't let me catch you stealing, and what they do is not steal, but instead they just want you not to catch them. So if they have misinterpreted what you thought you were teaching, it's going to be right in your face with these adolescents. The other thing, finally, is that, the brain's not done growing. 18 to 25-year-olds still have brain development. That's why the insurance companies reduce the rates once the guys get to be 25. Because before that time, their impulse control and their decision making is not what it's going to be once you're over 25. Isn't that funny that insurance companies know about development? The other thing that is a theory that you might want to think about, those in particular who have the teenagers or the later elementaries, is a theory called recycling. And the theory says that every 6 years, you get to come back around and look at these stages and re-experience some edges of them in some different ways. So if my 6-year-old, I've told you the baby's birth to 6 months, they, their job is to learn to trust and to attach to people. Now I've got the 6-year-old who I'm telling you is on the edge of structure and that sort of thing. Guess what? They're also entering school and having to deal with, who do I trust as my teacher? Will other adults help me? How is the world safe for me? And meanwhile, my 12-year-old, my goodness, guess what? Another 6 years. Here I am now. And our culture says, now you're going to enter middle school, or now you've got to figure it out with a whole other groups of people. So we never really get done with these stages of development, but we have an opportunity to rework them. So our 2-year-old no-sayer, anybody heard the resistance from an 8-year-old? How about the resistance from a 14-year-old who is, again, if I divide that by 6, that's a 2-year remainder. That's an opportunity to figure out, how do I say no and, be independent. So let's take a look at this. All right, so what do we do with these littlest of people? First of all, there is no discipline or punishment for babies, okay? The fact that we give them regular care builds that attachment, and that is a framework on which they're taking in the information, they're sorting it every second, and they're looking for the patterns on which to anchor, okay? So from birth to 3, we talk a lot about brain development, how important it is. This is that first seed of that. The thing about regular care is that it keeps the stress hormones low. And there's a chemistry in your brain that if I scare you, if there's a lot of chaotic stress in the environment, then the brain floods with a product called cortisol. And I don't know who did the research. I wish I had kept that document, because they now have been able to determine that it makes learning 7 times harder. So we want kids to come to their growing edge. We don't want to push them over into too much anxiety and stress. But anyway, this lays their foundation for positive discipline, and it lays the foundation for long-term mental health. Our toddlers, there are only 2 things we can really do in terms of guiding and keeping them set. One of them is what we call redirection. And redirection is, this little one is going for something, maybe something that is unsafe, like going after the dog. Let's go after the dog. And you know that the dog is a gentle dog, but no dog is happy if they get hurt. So our redirection is, that's not safe for puppy. You can play here, or you can do this. So I try to redirect them where it is they need to be, or where they can be that's safe. And I try to give them those 2 yeses for the no that is clearly under that, which is, no, it's not going to be okay to take your toy and your rattle and pound it on the dog. Okay, that's not safe. I'm not going to let that happen. Environmental management is another dominant tool for this stage. Those are the gates and the cabinet locks and the padding on rough edges, and that allows us to explore without getting hurt. Again, what I want to say is, this discipline strategy does not end with toddlers. These are like the core building blocks. You can use redirection with teenagers. The reality is, nope, I'm not going to let you hang out with your friends at the mall. Here are 2 other things you can do, and you can offer them a choice of 2 other things to do that are going to be safe, that you feel okay about. So redirection is not a bad thing to use anytime in our life. Environmental management, again, is something we will continue to use as children grow. So a middle school dance, the fact that there is a chaperone there, if you've got a chaperone, that changes the environment by having another adult there to watch and to guide and to keep the third eye that they're making safe choices. If you've got guns or alcohol in your house and you have adolescents, and now we're saying, of course, your pain relievers and those sorts of things, are they locked up? Are they secured in a way that children of any other age could not access them? So we will use environmental management so that people can be brave and try new things and think for themselves, and we can trust that that world will be safe for them in that process. So as I'm going through these topics, please be aware that although it may start at this age as a strategy, it does not end at that age as a strategy. So our preschoolers, oh my goodness, now guess what? Now we have, again, children who can frighten themselves with their imaginations. And in this, what happens, I know we intended well, and the researchers were absolutely right. This birth to 3 is incredibly important. However, they're not done yet. Okay, the brain is not done yet. And now that I can frighten myself, I have to plant seeds for coping. And because now I am awake to the fact that this is a huge world. It's bigger than I am, and I'm going to try and manage it. Some kids get very, very rigid in this stage. The only way that it can be done is my way. Well, that is one way to manage stress. It's easier if I'm the one who gets to decide what the rules are. So they will start to direct younger toddlers around and shove them around out of the way. Or they might, as I said, they might try whining. They might try throwing a temper tantrum. If a 2-year-old and under throws a temper tantrum, that's often an overloaded central nervous system. Okay? That is literally a biological meltdown. But a 4-year-old who's throwing a temper tantrum may or may not really be on so much overload as just wanting to be in charge. Our measure of whether or not a child is seriously overwhelmed is, can they self-calm in 3 to 5 minutes? If you can self-calm, yes, it's an awful time to listen to a kid scream, but they are okay. If they are melting down 15 times in an hour and a half or 2, that's another signal that kids need help. If they're tantruming and it goes on and on and on and they can't self-soothe. And the kind of help we do is to get them to physical or occupational therapy, because they cannot integrate the overwhelm with their bodies. So there are some kids who, because of their own sensitivities, etc., will need outside intervention to begin to learn skills for how do I calm my body. But at 3 to 6, there's going to be some times when I might try a few things. So first of all, our first step with little people is when they are breaking a rule, to train ourselves to think about the fact that they either don't know the rule or don't remember the rule, because this is a stage I'm living right in this moment. So if I'm jumping on the sofa and they're jumping on the sofa and you have told them an incredible number of times not to jump on the sofa, One of the things we need to do, first of all, is to see, are they even aware of what their body's doing? Because if I'm just living and being happy in myself, do I even know that I'm breaking the rule? So sometimes we have to ask, George, what's your body doing? Because they're just living it. Sometimes it helps if we say, what's our rule about the sofa? Because again, we have little people who can sing the ABCs long before they can read. So we need children to sing the rules as they begin to internalize what that means to stop their body. Okay. So what's our rule about, getting out of the car in the parking lot? If you've got a little kid who's out to run, you need, before they ever get released from that car seat or that seatbelt, what's our rule? And yes, we will hold hands in this parking lot so that they can be safe moving on. So this is the kind of thing you do. You teach the rules, teach the rules, teach the rules. It's okay to have some fun with that, because it's okay if, it's one of those times when, gee, did we forget to tell you the rule about picking up wet towels in the bathroom? What a silly thing to not remember to tell you that rule. And did Daddy forget to tell you that too? Or Grandpa forget to tell you that too? But so it's okay that you can play less than perfect as terms of not having reminded them. But again, the goal is to teach them. This is a stage where we have tools like time in and time out. Time in is when that child is so, having one of those days that they cannot play smoothly. And sometimes we need to enter in to co-regulate with them. So helping a child co-regulate might be that, a 3-year-old loves big noise, so they're coming roaring to the house. And if they need a bear in the house, you will be the mama bear so that little brother doesn't get knocked down. You can be part of that so that you can set a tone that brings it to a level that is safe for one another and makes a more, quote, socially acceptable way to be. You can teach children how to make it better, particularly if they didn't intend to hurt. Because sometimes preschoolers are moving so fast and hard and they have plunked into somebody and they have hurt them. And yes, that other child is injured, but I don't want a child to be bad when there was no intent to be bad in that labeling. So we want to say, oh my goodness, yes, you were running so fast and his head hit and it hurts. What could you do to make it better? How about if you go get a cold cloth for him? And meanwhile, you can check and see how bad the blood is or how big the injury is or whatever. Time out has a different flavor entirely. Time out can actually have two different ways of thinking about it. At the younger stage, time out is behavioral training. When you're not playing safe, when you're not able to, to be safe by people, you need to play over there. Time out does not necessarily mean that I put you in a box somewhere. Okay. It may mean that I cold shoulder the child who hurt the younger one or whatever and focus on the victim. We often will see this happen, believe it or not, with biters, where a child younger than a preschooler is biting. And, the child who bites, to make sure that they get the toy, well, then everybody focuses on the biter, and in a way that reinforces all the attention I get versus the victim. Meanwhile, what we want is to turn all of the attention to the victim, and so that doesn't get reinforced by the other child. There's also a real risk in the way people use timeout for, like, they will create a timeout chair or a timeout corner and then spend the next 5 minutes holding this child in a timeout chair. That is not timeout. That is 5 minutes of undivided adult attention. So it's totally it's totally backwards of what timeout is. I do want you to think about the fact that timeout is incredibly powerful if it's done correctly. And it can be experienced as punishing if it happens too often. So, short of the death penalty, solitary confinement is the worst punishment we create. And your little people do not warrant solitary confinement very much or very long. That's why there's a real limit on a minute per year. So a 6-year-old would not spend more than 6 minutes in timeout. And then our expectation is, what will you do to make it better when you come back? And you don't overburden it. We do want children to read social cues. And that means that we make them stop long enough to pay attention. If they have hurt someone, then phrases like, what does his face tell you? See his tears? He's saying that's not fun. So that awareness of what I do and the fact that it has an impact on others begins to get integrated into the information too. It's okay to use imagination and play. So a kid who's resistant getting dressed, it's like, here's this floppy sleeve. Oh no, I can't play today without help. I need Sam's arm in me so I can play. You can use that imagination. Kids love it. And it takes some of that pressure out of that head locking things. Do watch out for, if you don't, I won't. That invites a power struggle versus, when this is done, then we can do. So if you don't put your shoes on, I won't let you go outside, is a very different thing than, when your shoes are on, then it's time we can go outside. So if you don't, I won't invites battles. And I don't care what age you are, that 15-year-old, 16-year-old, we all have an issue with if you don't kind of messages. Do engage them in problem solving, and things like, where can you place it? Don't bump your sister. Point out their choices. Running in the library isn't safe. Will you walk or do we leave now? So the choice can be, we can keep doing this, or if you make the wrong choice, we won't. So do know that this is the stage they're learning the rules for living with others and beginning to plant seeds of coping. All right, our elementary age. Again, this is 2 ages, really. It is egocentric and it is sociocentric. So as you look at these things, you're going to encourage their social skills and their life skills. So this is a life stage for having basic chores and also for dealing with those issues of friendship. And it'll shift from a little child who is friends with somebody because they have the toy I want to play with, to being able to be friends with people who are slightly different than me and keep me stretching and growing. Again, time out and time in, pointing out choices, logical and natural consequences enter in. A natural consequence is, if you forget your lunch, you're hungry. Okay? Mama doesn't run, grandpa doesn't run to rescue you from not having your lunch. Now that's different if the child is diabetic and you have to make sure they have to have fuel. So again, I'm trusting you to know who you're raising. But the reality is that 99.9% of the time, natural consequences allow children to problem solve. So oftentimes for a child who is not rescued, they will do some negotiation with their friends about eating part of a sandwich or figuring out some other strategies for their own self-care. So it's not a bad thing that they, quote, pay some minimal dues with that. Logical consequences are the things we have to put in earlier so that they don't pay dues down the road that are too big. So the natural consequence of eating a lot of sugar and not brushing your teeth is that ultimately your teeth are going to be unhealthy and in pain. But I can't wait for the natural consequence to teach this child what they should have done at 5 if they're not going to pay dues for it till they're 15? That's way too far away. So for us, we put in some little things to help them learn at the time when it's safer for them to learn. So when we remember to brush our teeth, then we can have time for another story. So we can, so long as they realize that that is part of the bedtime pattern, or, you know, when we remember to brush our teeth, we can put a sticker on our chart. And then when you have so many stickers, you get to be the one who picks out what we put on pizza this week. So that it doesn't have to be a reward, a big thing we buy them, a new toy. It can be built into the family already. If you already have pizza on some night of the week, and it is fun to be the one who gets to be in charge of what goes on it. That is a family celebration. And it's an acknowledgement of work well done. So that's the, you know, it's like kids with homework. They don't understand and won't understand until they're much older those patterns of studying that help them along the way. So we need to build in structures around them that they can see these little incremental steps and logically see the connection. So when they spend too much time distracted by a phone, the logical consequence is that the phone needs to rest until they can make sure that the time is always there for their homework. But it's all about how the use of time is, and not that if you don't get your grade on, or if you don't, I'm going to take your phone away. That's a whole different flavor than you have shown me that you can't remember how to use your time if your phone is here. So I will keep the phone so that your time gets used. Okay, see how it's a different flavor in inviting them to be engaged in raising themselves. But it does take us time to think about what consequence makes sense and to make it as logically tied as we can to their experience. That's the hard part for us. And so another time, Angela can host a problem-solving group with you guys, and you can talk about what's a logical one, because sometimes they don't spontaneously come up. Do follow through. We are so rushed and so busy. It is so easy to say, clean your room, and then we'll go do this. Well, then the time comes, the room is not clean, and we have moved on anyway because life is going that fast. Well, if that happens too often, then our leading doesn't count. If I just drag my feet a little longer, I don't have to clean my room because grandma won't have time to get to it anyway. And that is where we struggle. That's why we need those charts. That's why we sometimes will race them. You know, you will be in one room racing with one kid and they can race with the other grandparent or whatever. So you can make it game-wise, but we need to follow up and follow through, and do collaborate with the other teachers, coaches, whoever else, because the more you can be a team racing these kids, the less opportunity they have to fall through the cracks. Because teachers see life differently, coaches see the kids in different contexts, and so do think about who those other folks are, and as much as possible, work with them. But this is the stage when you will talk directly about what you think is important for them. Honor, sexuality, money, faith, whatever your values are, you begin to talk about them out loud. So sexuality, you know, preschoolers need to know their body parts and be able to talk about them. Elementary kids, you could start saying, in our family, we think it's best if, and you go ahead and fill in those blanks. Because if you wait until they are 13 to bring up sex, guess what? They heard it already from the guys in the locker room at 11 or 12. So you cannot wait. You need to build these in along the way. They are learning who they are, and they're setting their patterns. So when did you know you were a procrastinator or not a procrastinator? When did you know you were good at reading or not good at reading? When did you decide that, you know, you can manage stuff on your own? 6 to 12 is when you start that. Um, so anyway, so that's, now here we go. It's all the same stuff. Nothing changes except that we need to be very careful that we don't use sarcasm or put downs in our humor. We shouldn't be using it ever, but for adolescents, this is really they can come across as brave and a lot of bravado, but they are sensitive spirits. And so please be careful of that.